Okay, so this question says that the cost of hiring a birthday party service is shown below. So let's just start by looking at the graph. And what is the relationship that is shown on the graph? What are the two variables that they're relating? They're looking at what? Number of guests and the cost for the birthday party service, right? So just by looking at the graph, what can you tell me is happening? As you have more guests, what happens to the cost? It increases. Okay, so you can even write a note there. Increases as number of guests increase, the cost increases. So it's important that you're able to interpret the graph. Okay, so you know that when you come up with an equation, are you going to add or subtract? Add, because it's increasing, right? The graph is increasing. So the first thing you're trying to figure out is, what is the initial value? If you have 0 guests, how much do you have to pay? Okay, so this is something important to remember. The initial value is always where the x, right? This is my x and y. It's always located where x is equal to 0. So you look at 0 and then figure out, does the graph start at 0, 0? No. It starts at 0, 100. So when x is 0, when number of guests is 0, the cost is $100. What do you think that represents then? Okay, it represents like a rental fee, let's say. Okay, you still have to pay $100. So the initial value is $100, and it's the rental fee. You're hiring this service, you still have to pay them $100 just for basically to rent their service. And then every time you have a guest attend the party, what happens to the cost? It goes up. So we're going to figure out what the rate of change is. What does it go up by? So the rate of change, another name for rate of change is slope, which I'm sure you heard yesterday. Okay? The slope is, what is the slope? What does this mean? What is a slope? The slope of a line represents the steepness of a line. Okay? We're going to do some investigations with this. Okay, that's the slope of a line. It tells you how steep the line is. When you're calculating the slope, you're calculating how much it goes up by or could go down. But in this case, it's going up by a certain amount. So we're trying to figure out, what is the slope? What does this increase by? What does the cost increase by for every guest, right? What's the rate of change? How does this graph change? So one way you can do this, I'm going to show you using coordinates, is you can pick any 2 points on the graph. So I want you right now to just pick any 2 points that are easy to figure out what the coordinate is. So for example, I'm just going to pick randomly this one here, because I know I can easily read this point, and I want you to label. So the point I picked is 5, what? What does this go up by? 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Okay, so I picked the coordinate 5, 125. And I'm going to pick, let's pick this one right here. I'm just picking 2 random points. This is 11, 12, 13, 165. Okay? The reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to figure out how this relation changes. What does it go up by, and what does it go over by? How does the cost increase, and how does the number of guests increase, to figure out what it is for one. Okay, so you can draw a little triangle, and we can actually use the graph to count, but then I'll show you how to use an equation to figure that out. So what do the y values increase by? I'm starting here at what? I'm starting at 125, right? You guys see that? And every time I skip a square, what does that represent? What does it skip counting by? 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. So it's going up by 40. Do you guys see that? It's going up by 40, right? From 125 to 165. Is that 40? From 125 to 165. Does that represent a difference of 40? Okay, so you could actually, you're just finding the difference between these two y values, right? And then we have to figure out, what does it go over by? How does the number of guests change? So I'm starting at 5. And what do your x values count by? Does this count by 5s? It does. Every square represents what? 1. This is going by 1s. You have to look at the scale. So I'm going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Does that make sense? I started at 5 and I'm ending at 13. What's the difference between 13 and 5? What's 13 take away 5? 8. So would you say that slope, or the rate of change, it rises by 40, it goes up by 40, and the run, that's the horizontal distance, it goes over by 8. Does that make sense so far? Yes? Okay, what's 40 divided by 8? 5. That's the rate of change. What does that mean in this situation? We're looking at a relationship between guests and costs. What does this 5 mean? $5 per guest, per person. That's the rate of change. That's it. Okay? Okay, so back to this question. We already answered this. In this situation, what did the rate of change represent? What was the relationship? It represented the cost per person or per guest. So if we know that the initial value was 100 and the rate of change is $5 per person, how would you come up with an equation that shows you how to calculate the cost of this service? Yes. Yep. 100 plus 5x. What are you missing? An equation has to have what? An equal sign. What does that represent? That represents how you would calculate the cost of this service. Okay, so raise your hand if you got that equation. So now that you have an equation, you can use it to answer these questions. If you had 100 guests, well, I'm going to plug that in for x. What would be the cost? So plug it in. 100 plus 5 times 100. What's 5 times 100? 5 times 100 is 500. 100 plus 500. So if I had 100 people coming to the party, it would cost me $600. How many guests? So this time we're trying to figure out x, right? Did you invite if the cost was 1,000? So if the cost was 1,000, well, we know that the cost is equal to 100 plus 5 times the number of guests. We're trying to figure out how many guests. How would you solve for x? You have to get x by itself. So you tell us what you did again. 1,000 minus 100. That will be equal to 5 times the number of guests. What's 1,000 take away 100? Okay, so 5 times something gives you 900. Work backwards. What's the opposite of multiplication? Divided by 5. Good. So the number of guests would be what? Pardon? 180. So if you spent $1,000, you could have 180 guests at the party. Okay, to calculate the slope, we looked at the rise, so that's the vertical distance, right? And then we looked at the run, which was the horizontal distance. But you can actually calculate it. We were calculating the difference, like you said, the difference between two values. Well, if you're looking at a graph, when you're finding what it rises by, were we looking at the differences between the x values or the differences between the y values? So you're subtracting one of the y values from the coordinate, take away the other y value. So we label this as y2 minus y1. The second coordinate, take away the first coordinate, just the y values, right? Does that make sense? Because we had our here, let's say this was the value here and this was here, you're looking at the difference between, this was what, 13, what was it, 165? And this was 5? 125? So we were looking at the difference between the y value, the y values. It was 165 take away 125, which was what? 40. Okay, so this is xy, this is xy. And I just call this 2 and 1. 2 and 1. It's just separating the different coordinates. This is coordinate 2 and this is coordinate 1. Okay? So I was subtracting my y values. 165 take away 125 is 40. And then what would be the formula to calculate the run, the horizontal distance? Yep. We did 13 minus 5, yes. So you took x2 minus x1, and we got 8. And when you simplify it, that will give you the slope, and another name for that is rate of change. That tells you the rate at which the line changes. So this is the formula you need to memorize. Okay? So the question will say, determine the slope of the line that passes through each pair of points. So the first one, you're going to do this without graphing, but just to show you, I'll just do a little sketch on the side. I have coordinate 1, my x and y. Let's call this is 3, 5. Let's say it's around here. And then I have the other coordinate, which is another x and y, which would be here, right? Okay, that's my line. Without graphing, I'm just trying to figure out what is the rise over the run. So again, we're doing y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You're trying to find the differences in the y values. So I'm going to label this 1, and I'm going to label this 2. Coordinate 1 and coordinate 2. It does not matter which order you write it in, as long as if I say this is x1, then that has to be y1. Each coordinate has to have the same number. Does that make sense? So plug in your values. What's y2? Yep.
Y2 is 2.
And what's y1?
5.
Okay, so we're going to do 2 minus 5 over, no, make sure you go in the same order. That's x2, so you have to go from 2 to 1. 0 minus 3, that's it. You could do it the other way around, yes. What's 2 take away 5?
3. Oh, no, negative 3.
What's 0 take away 3?
3.
What's negative 3 over negative 3? So the rate of change is 1. If I did it the other way around, if I called this 2, look here, and I called this 1, it does not matter. I could have done it this way. I could have done 5 take away 2 over 3 take away 0. As long as you're going in the correct order. What's 5 take away 2? What's 3 take away 0? What's 3 divided by 3? Positive 1. You get the same answer. Okay, it doesn't matter what order you do it in.
So we could do it that way.
Yep, for sure. And if you look here, this rises by 3. What was it? And this was 3. And it runs by 1, 2, 3. If you graph it, you can check your answer. It had a rise of 3 and a run of 3. 3 over 3 equals 1. The slope is 1. Okay, so did you guys label this x? Which one did you call x1? The first one? Okay, so 1, 1, 2, 2. So now what's the calculation? Yes, so we have to go in the order. So y2 is 2, y1 is 3, over what? Negative 2 minus 3. Once you got the order down packed, we just simplify it. What's 2 take away 3?
Negative 1.
What's negative 2 take away 3? So your answer would be 1 over 5. That's the slope. Okay? That's it. That means that this line rises by 1. It goes up by 1. And it goes over 1. So let's say it's here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your line. Good. So we're going to do 24 take away. No.
No, negative.
Negative 10 over. Yep. 20 take away 21. I cannot write 21 take away 20. It will be wrong because I'm starting here to here to here. Does that make sense? Okay, what's 24 take away negative 10?
Negative.
24 take away negative ends up being plus. Over 20 take away 21. Simplify that. Positive divided by negative is, raise your hand if you got slope equals negative 34.